It's estimated that close to 1 million Russian personnel have been killed, captured or wounded fighting in Ukraine and Kursk. Despite those staggering losses, Vladimir Putin is still likely to have a bigger military when this conflict ends than when it began. And there's indications that Moscow is already preparing its post-war posture, with signs Russia is beefing up its military presence along its western border, specifically along its 830-mile frontier with Finland, a country which since April 2023 has been a member of NATO, along with its neighbour Sweden.
Of course, we are strengthening our defence forces. We are investing more money. The military budget is growing and so on. So, yeah, one could say that we are also definitely preparing also for the worst, as one has to be when we are a border nation next to Russia.
According to the New York Times, satellite imagery shows Russia is expanding its border bases, some of which have been dormant for decades. Satellite imagery shows rows of new tents and new warehousing to store Russian vehicles. Hardened shelters used to protect fighter jets are being renovated, and a helicopter base, which has been unused and overgrown for years, is now a hive of activity. Finnish defence officials predict Russia will redeploy troops to its western border once the war in Ukraine is over. Moscow is turning its brigades into divisions and restructuring its military districts. They believe they have 5 years before the Kremlin has the forces it needs to threaten Finland and the Baltic states. For Russia, access to the Arctic is key. After laying empty for 20 years, Russian helicopters have returned to a base near Murmansk, a port in the Arctic Circle. The New York Times says dozens of Russian aircraft were recently deployed to the Alenia airbase, less than 100 miles from the border with Finland. At Kamenka, a Russian base 40 miles from Finland, hundreds of new tents have appeared. While here at Alakurti and at Petrozavodsk, the Russians are building warehousing for vehicle storage.
The nearest ones are maybe dozens of kilometers away, roughly speaking, but then again there's also places hundreds of kilometers away, especially in the north. But when we are talking about air bases, when we're talking about bases with strategic bombers which can fire cruise missiles, for example, 200 kilometers, for example, 100 kilometers, it's a relatively short distance. For example, from the Alenia airport, strategic bombers take off to missions to fire cruise missiles to Ukraine. So the war is also happening near our borders as we speak.
And it's not just Finland. New tents and other military kit has also appeared at a Russian base 80 miles from Estonia, where the UK has 900 personnel stationed as part of NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence, or EFP. While for now Russia remains focused on Ukraine, the war will end at some point. Moscow already signalling that when that happens, it intends to turn its attention to the west, building up its forces along NATO's northern frontier. Simon Newton, BFBS Forces News.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has arrived in Lithuania to inaugurate Berlin's first permanent overseas military unit since World War II, according to Vilnius. The 45th Armoured Brigade's aim is to strengthen NATO's eastern flank close to Russia. The creation of this 5,000-troop unit was initiated in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This move is unprecedented for Germany due to its dark past, which usually meant Germany opted for a more passive approach. Merz's visit will include a meeting with President Gitanas Nausėda. Their talks are expected to cover Lithuanian-German bilateral relations, defence cooperation, support for Ukraine, and key issues on the European Union's agenda.
Kyiv came under a sustained drone attack and missile attack last night, lasting 7 hours. Reportedly, 250 drones were used and 14 ballistic missiles. It sent the population again underground into the tube stations to shelter for most of the night. And there are indications that there were other attacks in other parts of Ukraine, in the south and further east, and as far west as Odessa. So that air operation on the Russians' part goes on. But the Ukrainians hit back themselves on Yelets. Last night, they claimed to have hit a battery factory on the Russian side of the border, deep inside Russia, in fact, at Yelets. And the battery factory creates batteries, manufactures batteries for missiles. And so Yelets itself is not a particularly important town, but the battery factory is, because without batteries, Russia's ballistic and cruise missiles can't easily operate. We have no idea how much damage the Ukrainians might have done to Yelets battery factory. They claim that they had a big hit on it, but we'll see. But if they were able to interrupt the supply of batteries to missiles, then arguably they can do something about the number of ballistic and cruise missiles that are being targeted against Ukraine, more or less now on a nightly basis. Meanwhile, the ground war goes on, and attention at the moment is concentrated on Kharkiv and the area in the north of Ukraine. Kharkiv is the second city. It's only less than 20 miles away from the border. And reportedly, the Russians are massing troops on their side of the border. The Ukrainians have been talking about this for several weeks now. And the expectation is that they're going to launch some sort of offensive in the north against the Kharkiv area and further northwest against Sumy, which is another major city in the north of Ukraine. Almost certainly, the Russians won't be able to take Kharkiv. It's the second city. It's a big city. They'd never got really near to taking it in 2022 when they really did try, nor can they probably take Sumy as cities. But what they probably can do is actually get over the border and begin to put pressure all the way along this border. What the Russians say, and they're making this fairly clear in Putin's statements, is that they want a buffer zone all the way along the front to protect them from Ukrainian attacks. From a military point of view, that's neither here nor there. It's not what they want. What they want to do is to create pressure along the border to pin Ukrainian forces in place so that those Ukrainian forces can't go further south, where they're now badly needed for the summer offensives, which the Russians are also pursuing in the south. And the other reason that they might want forces on the Ukrainian side of the border is it gives them a foot in the Kharkiv Oblast, the Kharkiv region and the Sumy region. And if they have a foot in those regions, then in any future negotiations, and we're a long way from them at the moment, but in any future negotiations, they will say, we're already in those regions, we will keep that footprint, and of course we want more, just as we want more in the 4 other oblasts that we have a footprint in, but we haven't fully conquered. So the politics of this overlays all of the military activity, and not least, the politics of this comes into the prisoner exchange, which is ongoing at the moment. Yesterday, about 500 prisoners were exchanged on each side, 500 each. And today, another 350-odd on each side. We expect these prisoner exchanges to go on again tomorrow until both sides have exchanged 1,000 prisoners, as they agreed to do last weekend at the Istanbul summit. This is all good in itself. It's a humanitarian gesture. Both sides want it. But in reality, it doesn't take us any nearer to a ceasefire. In fact, if we think about it logically, we are probably further away from a ceasefire now in Ukraine than we were about a month ago.
Він не хоче. Хай би йшли на перемир'я. Уже що ж це бомбить людей отако. Бідні діти, у мене внучка 3 годика, воно бідне з переляку кричало, всі час воно там неспокійне. Звісно, хай йдуть на перемир'я. Так, а що ж, як він не хоче, Путін той, щоб він вже здох.
Дуже велике горе в людей, розумієте? Це в першу чергу, що я подумала, що пострадали люди ні за що. Велике горе в людей.
В якому будинку? Ймовірно, в цьому будинку знаходиться двоє людей, мати і дитина. Вони зараз професійно обійдуть і поверхнево глянуть будинки, поки наші...
Поїхала вже в швидкій і один загиблий.
Лосько Олена Василівна, правильно?
Заходить з нашої сторони. Увага, небо, увага, небо. Всім роді...
Якщо потрібно поставити пожежний автомобіль.
О, це у вас що це за кров? Що трапилось?
Це сина трошки поранило.
Що не турбує наразі?
Ні, це моє було.
Naming a street, renaming a street in D.C. It was fairly innocent stuff by American standards.
Let me take a look.
Can you provide us an update on Russia and Ukraine as well?
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
President, what do you want to do about
And
that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally fake. All right, any other questions? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it. That's all I have to say.
Can I follow up on that? A Russian commander reportedly said that Putin was almost caught in the middle of a drone attack from Ukraine. So do you have any...
I haven't heard that, but maybe that would be a reason. I don't know, but I have not heard that.